Hi, so today we're going to be talking about Army Pomorze and the German 4th Army and a bit of the 3rd Army. This is episode 2 of the 13 or so part series on the German invasion of Poland. Last episode, we talked about what I called the Moreland Front, so action in Mowa, action in Rzeszów, and the fight between 3rd Army and Polish Moreland Army. So in today's episode, episode 2, I'm going to talk about the action between German 4th Army and the Polish Pomorze Army. So first, you need to understand the geography of and the landscape of this area. This is the Polish corridor where the fight happens, and this is like a little panhandle almost in the Polish northwest that reaches the sea, the Baltic Sea, from like the main parts of western Poland and Greater Poland, and this actually separates German East Prussia from the rest of the country, like the mainland of Germany. So it is strategically important diplomatically, especially before the war, because Germany had been wanting that. There are a number of ethnic German civilians living in these areas, but it is under Polish control since the end of World War One, and Hitler wants to take it over. And in terms of military perspective, this is important because it would capturing the Polish corridor would allow the Germans to the German 4th Army to reach the 3rd Army and actually move forward, perhaps south to Warsaw or further east, whatever the cause. It's an important area, and it's covered by the Polish Pomorze Army. So the Polish army it was always very extended. Poland put a lot of military budget into its armed forces, and it cared about its national defense, but not as much on the national defense of the Polish corridor. Why? Because it's just strategically difficult to control. It is plains, there's no mountains, there's no large, wide rivers like the Vistula to prevent German invasion or breakthrough, and it was kind of seen by a lot of members of the Polish High Command as a lost cause, as it was bound to be captured by the Germans the first few days of the war, regardless of what the Polish did, but it was necessary, politically necessary, to put an army in this area because they don't want the Germans to just waltz into the area and not strike anywhere else and call it a day, because that's what the Germans did in Czechoslovakia. They just walked into the Sudetenland, although of course there was a Munich agreement for that to happen, but perhaps Poland feared that there will be a second Munich Style Conference between the Allies and Germany, in which they would allow them to have the Polish corridor in return for extended peace, or the Germans, regardless of what the Allies say, just waltz into the Polish corridor. And if there are no divisions in the corridor, then it's lost. Poland can't claim war for it. And that was a major fear that happened. So the idea was, if you're going to go for the corridor, you're going for everything. You're going for all of Poland. You're going to war with the Polish nation. And that's exactly what happened in September 1st, 1939. Germany went to war with all of Poland, not just the Polish corridor. And so yeah, the Polish corridor had one army known as the Pomorze Front. Now this wasn't a very good army per se, because, as I said, it wasn't the most important army. Unlike, for example, the Moreland army that did get sufficient resources in a lot of matters, because it was seen as something that can actually stop a German invasion, hopefully. But the Pomorze Army was almost like a sacrifice that be given to the Germans in order to delay the invasion of the main core areas of Poland for a few days or hopefully even weeks. And therefore, there was no priority in keeping the Pomorze Army supplied in the highest quality and having the best ammunition, weapons, artillery, air support, things like these. It wouldn't have the best forces at this time. So the Polish army, of course, had an intensive conscription policy, so it would have a lot of men. So it could form 7 armies, which is an incredible feat, I must say, because the Germans, opposed to the Poles, have just 5 armies, and even if you include the Bernalak army, that's still just 6. So Poland managed to have a larger quantity of armies than Germany, although of course this data doesn't really mean much because each army has different varying levels of strength, and actually I think the Polish army was much weaker in general because it was outnumbered by the Germans, not only in manpower but also in equipment, in tanks, in air power, everything. Half of the German Air Force was in Poland, and more than half of the army was against Poland. So it's a large force, and perhaps some of the swiftest movements in the early part of the campaign, the swiftest defeat of any Polish army was that of the Pomorze Army, and it would be for exactly the reasons as I said. So the vulnerable army, the Pomorze Army, was commanded by Lieutenant General Władysław Bojanowski, who is he's a former resident of the Russian Empire before he joined the Polish Legion, and then strived to work for Polish independence, and then became an officer in the Polish army. So the Pomorze Army itself covers basically the entirety of the Polish corridor, and also a bit of the base of the corridor, if you will, around areas of Grudziądz, Torun, Bydgoszcz, this area, in the northwest of Western Poland. And it would be allocated 3 infantry divisions to its cause: the 9th Infantry Division, the 27th Infantry Division, and the 15th Infantry Division. And in addition, there were 2 so-called National Defense Brigades, which were, well, infantry brigades that just had fancy names pretty much. That's really what they were. In the East Operational Group, there were 2 infantry divisions namely the 4th Infantry Division and the 16th Infantry Divisions, that will cover the eastern side near the city of Grudziądz against the German 4th Army, specifically the 21st Corps. And there would be the Polish Army to its south, which is not a part of it, not a part of Pomorze Army, but it's good to note that there's an entire army sitting to the south of it that didn't do much and weren't really attacked in the early days of the war, and that there wasn't just like no troops, no Polish troops south of it. There were an entire Polish army. So in the Chersk operational group, which is up in, you guessed it, Chersk, which is sort of near the town of Tuchola, where the Battle of Tuchola Forest comes from. The Chersk operational group consisted mainly of the Pomorze Cavalry Brigade, Pomeranian Cavalry Brigade. That would include a lot of Uhlans, Lancer regiments, that you'll see what these cavalry units can do. And in total, including the Chersk operational group and the East operational group, there's 5 infantry divisions: 9th, 15th, 27th, 4th, and 16th. There were 2 national defense brigades and 1 cavalry brigade. So furthest in the north, again, was Chersk operational group with the Pomeranian Cavalry Brigade, and then the 27th Infantry Division, which is commanded by General Drapela or Colonel Drapela. And then below that would be the 9th Infantry Division, and then below that the 15th Infantry Division. 15th Infantry Division would be the lowest division, the further south division in the Pomorze Army before the Polish Army starts. So the Pomorze Army was handed a lot of good men, many troops, a substantial amount. You could do a lot with 5 divisions and 3 brigades, but again, it didn't have the best equipment, didn't have the best defenses all the time. Sure, there were bunkers at certain places, but it didn't have the best defenses naturally, unlike the swamps and Army Modlin in the mountains in the Carpathians. So when all the German units started invading on September 1st, the Pomorze Army was somewhat disorganized, but more importantly, it was under some confusion, and it wasn't, and it lacked certain elements of order of what a normal army should have. And actually, I'm gonna talk about what happened initially. They offered almost no resistance in the start. They offered almost no resistance. But then a few hours passed and they gave a lot of resistance. And they were trying their utmost, their best, just like any other Polish force in this part of the war. And they would do very well for pretty much the first day, and after that they would slowly just collapse and disintegrate, and much of the forces would be gone in a few days. So somewhat similar to a Modlin army in that aspect. Another thing is the weather. The weather benefited the Poles in this area because the fog and the cloudiness of the first few days, September 1st, September 2nd especially, would have horrible weather for planes, so Luftwaffe activities could not really occur in this area. There were, more eastern areas were more prone to Luftwaffe attacks, and Luftwaffe could not really attack anywhere in the Pomorze front in the early days of the war. And having that aside, alright, the German forces. So the German forces have they have 9 divisions, I believe, in this area. So Army Group North, which was actually originally called the Second Army until September 2nd, was commanded by Federal von Bock, and this consisted of 4th Army and 3rd Army. 3rd Army is what I talked about yesterday, or last episode, but 4th Army is the one in Western Pomerania that's doing the main portion of the attack. Now, there's also one Army Corps in the 3rd Army that is attacking in the western direction to cut off the Polish corridor from the other side. So if you have the Polish corridor as in this area, represented by my hand, and in the west you have the German 4th Army. You have one Army Corps in the 3rd Army that is attacking in this area, and it wouldn't get too far because they're also stopped by a river, but they'd also be important in this area because it would keep the 4th and 16th Infantry Divisions in check all the time. They'd be busy. So, alright, from north to south, the 4th Army consisted of the 19th Army Corps, which is also sometimes called the 19th Motorized Corps. It's commanded by the famous Heinz Guderian. Heinz Guderian is the commander of this Army Corps, and it consists of 3 divisions: the 20th Motorized Division, 2nd Motorized Division, and 3rd Panzer Division. And by the way, it's actually technically called the 2nd Infantry Division, 20th Infantry Division, but like 2nd Infantry Division parentheses motorized, and same thing with 20th. I just felt it's easier to just call it 2nd Motorized Division, 20th Motorized Division, because that's what they are. They are motorized infantry divisions, which are different than light infantry divisions, so like the 3rd Infantry Division or 21st Infantry Division. They're different types of units. Motorized divisions are much more mobile, and they're not something that the Polish army really has. So this most definitely the spearhead corps, Heinz Guderian. You got the only Panzer Division in the 4th Army, 3rd Panzer Division, plus the only 2 motorized divisions. You get 20th Motorized, 2nd Motorized, and they're going directly across the corridor to attempt to cut it off. And next on the list from north through south, it's the 2nd Army Corps. So the 2nd Army Corps is commanded by Adolf Strauss, and Adolf Strauss's 2nd Corps has the 3rd Infantry Division and the 32nd Infantry Division. And both of them are just standard infantry divisions, and they're positioned a bit further to the south, and they're also going to be attacking in the Tuchola Forest area, but also a bit north of Big Gosht is where they're going to be. And the 3rd Army Corps, it's the smallest out of them all, at least in this part. As a 50th Infantry Division, and then to its south, the Netz Brigade. The Netz Brigade is it's a weak infantry brigade, stronger than a regiment, but it's a brigade, and it's actually originally a police force, but has been transitioned into becoming a sort of light infantry force. So that's what the Nets Brigade is and why it's unnumbered. A lot of brigades aren't numbered, unlike regiments and divisions. So, and by the way, it's commanded by Kurt Haas. That's the commander of the 3rd Army Corps. And the 4th Army also has some reserves. So Leonard Kalpich's Border Guard Command 1 it's a border guard command, but that's the only one that I'll actually like talk about a little bit because it has an infantry division in it, the 207th Infantry Division. There's also Border Guard Command 2 and Border Guard Command 12, which aren't as important because they don't have any infantry divisions in it. They're just guarding border to make sure the Polish regiments can't make any counter attacks into German territory, because that's not what the Germans want. They're each sizes of like a few thousand, made up of multiple battalions. So all in all, the 4th Army is pretty large force. They have many divisions, and oh yeah, also in reserve there's also the 218th Infantry Division and the 23rd Infantry Division in 4th Army Reserves that isn't directly used in any of the frontline combat strength, especially because 218th is one of the newer divisions with less troops and less quality troops. So a lot of these if you see 200 something in the number of a German infantry division at this point in 1939 and even 1940, they're probably weaker divisions, and they're probably divisions that have less strength in numbers and equipment and experience, and that's why a lot of these will be are positioned in the French front along the Maginot Line and on the Belgian border at this time in the September campaign, because they need some forces, but Germany can't spare a lot of super good divisions, which is why there won't be any panzer divisions in the French border. So anyway, the 4th Army, good fighting force. 3rd Army, I forgot. So 21st Corps, that's commanded by Nikolaus von Falkenhorst, and by the way, this is the guy who's going to be in Norway in April 1940. The 21st Corps is the most western part of the 3rd Army's jurisdiction, and it's attacking the city of Grudziądz, where the 4th and 16th Polish divisions are. But the 21st and 228th Infantry Divisions of the Germans are the ones that are attacking this Falkenhorst's dictator. So not a particularly strong army corps, but it definitely matters because it's taking the pressure on the other side of the corridor, while the biggest advances come from the west, heading east to cut off the Polish corridor and the troops inside it. Yeah, so I think that's pretty much all for the organization of the Polish Pomorze Army and the German 4th and a bit of 3rd Armies. So I guess I can talk about what actually happens. So I'll talk first about what happens in the Danzig area, because it's a part of the Polish quarter. It's the most northern part. There are no divisions there. It's lightly defended, much more lightly defended than the other parts because it's such a small area. But there's a lot of initial resistance against the German invasion in these northern parts, especially the Hell Peninsula and Westerplatte. But there's also things inside the Danzig Free State as well. So I guess that's what I'll be talking about first. So Danzig is strategically important. Um, that's that's the area where a lot of international politics between Germany and Poland is centered at, because Germany wants Danzig and the Polish corridor, and Danzig Free State is what the crisis is mostly about. Although it's about the entirety of Poland, Germany tells Poland that it's just about Danzig and about the Danzig to Polish corridor. So Danzig Free State is an independent state, but it's above 90 percent ethnically German. It's by far pro Nazi in its politics as well. So it would become annexed by Germany on September 1st, but I'll tell you exactly how that happened. So the defending parts in this area, most northern tip of the Polish corridor, were the land coastal defense, which had headquarters in Gdynia, and the sea coastal defense, which is centered at the Hell Peninsula. There's also a small garrison force at Westerplatte, and really they're small forces. The land coastal defense, which is technically actually a part of the Navy, although it's really in a land force. The land coastal defense had around 12,000 men-ish by the time of the invasion, although the numbers kept adding up and increasing ever since March, when the mobilization occurred. And it was only given to naval rifle regiments because it wasn't seen as a strategically super important area, but that's 2/3 of a division. So it has a substantial force. It's not nothing. Two regiments, you can do a lot with 2 regiments, and it's centered at Gdynia, and again, since March, it would gain a lot. And before hostilities, there were only a few battalions, but after the hostilities really began to muster up in August, the Polish HQ gave 2 regiments, 2 naval rifle regiments for this defense force. And the headquarters of the entire Polish Navy was at Gdynia, and it was at Gdynia before August 31st, but obviously it's September 1st when the invasion occurred. So there's so because the headquarters of the Polish Navy moved from Gdynia to, I believe, the Hell Peninsula, there's an entire garrison force at Gdynia which would help and support the land coastal defense force in its defense of Gdynia. And the land coastal defense force was mostly centered around Gdynia. The sea coastal defense force was primarily in the Hell Peninsula. So it's another small group, roughly 10,000 men in total, and it had the objective of keeping the Hell Peninsula. So it had a small force, a single regiment of infantry. Again, it's technically part of the Navy. It's under the naval branch of the Polish Armed Forces. But it had artillery. It had an artillery battalion, anti-aircraft battalion, and some infantry. So it numbered like several thousand. So not too big, and it was that's where the headquarters of the Polish Navy would be after August 31st, when the headquarters changed. So from Gdynia to Hell is where the naval headquarters changed, and that's also strategically pretty important, because if you look at the geography of the Hell Peninsula, it's very thin. It's very thin and very narrow, but it's also very long. And really, the only way you can attack it without suffering immense casualties is by having absolute control over the sea around it, so that beach landings could occur at different parts of the garrison. So it was expected for both of these forces, the land coastal defense force and the sea coastal defense force, to be annihilated pretty early on. So they didn't have the best equipment, best units, although, as I said, the Polish headquarters did allocate them a few regiments, 2 regiments in Gdynia and 1 regiment in Hell. But all of these formations were part of the fleet command of the Polish Navy. So, and also there's a company-sized unit in Westerplatte Peninsula, not the Hell Peninsula. It's a small peninsula inside like Danzig, pretty much, and is commanded by Major Sucharski, and that's also part of the Navy. It's a much smaller force than the Land Coastal Defense Force, Sea Coastal Defense Force, as I said before. And yet, somehow, Westerplatte would survive longer than Gdynia, and a really long time at that, until September 7th. Whenever I think about the Battle of Westerplatte, I'm reminded of this movie. There's this really good movie that's in Polish, but has you can get English subtitles, called 1939 Battle of Westerplatte, and I've watched it and I liked it. It's a pretty high quality film, I think. Anyway, the Polish Navy, besides all of these infantry and land forces that are just Navy by name, although, like, you know, they're land forces that are part of the Navy is what it is. But there's actual naval units, right? There's ships, submarines, destroyers. Poland would not have a huge navy regarding, I mean, it has a tiny coastline, you can see, but it would have a submarine and destroyer force, although it would have no heavy ships like cruisers or battleships or anything like that. So the 4 destroyers, Witcher, Burusa, Błyskawica, I think, Błyskawica, and Grom. These 4 destroyers were part of the Polish Navy, and then 5 submarines, the Wilk, Zbik, Rys, Zep, and Orzel, were the 5 submarines in the Polish Navy. And actually 4 of these, the 4 destroyers, 3 of the 4, so the Burusa, Błyskawic, and Grom, everything except for the Witcher, were all sent to England as part of the Peking Plan, which began on August 26, 1939, a few days before. So they'd be on their way to Scotland at this point, after some negotiations that happened on that part. So really, you only have 1 destroyer and 5 submarines to defend this entire area. The primary German force attacking this area was the 207th Infantry Division, which again, it's a weak infantry division, but it's definitely stronger than the weak, measly Polish defenses the Navy has in these areas. And Friedrich Georg Eberhard is the commander of this 207th Division. It's a reserve, kind of. It's technically under Border Guard Command 1, but it's larger than the rest of Border Guard Command 1. It's in the far north, and that's where it actually comes into. And the other parts of Border Guard Command 1, the actual Border Guard parts of it, would also play some part. They just kind of like hold the defensive line to make sure that there's no like weird moves that the Polish Navy would pull on the Germans in this area. And also, Germany would have one capital ship in the fight, the SMS Schleswig-Holstein, named after the northern province. So it's a heavy cruiser. So I mean, okay, it's sometimes called a. Okay, it is a battleship. It's a battleship. It's a pre-dreadnought battleship of the Deutschland class, but it's much weaker than the dreadnoughts, of course. And this, I'll tell you a little bit about it. It was decommissioned back in 1917, but it was recommissioned. The Treaty of Versailles happened, and they took away most of the German Navy, but they said, hey, here's some really bad ships that you can have. And the Germans took it. They kept the Schleswig-Holstein, and at this point, because of that allowance, that the Germans would have the Schleswig-Holstein to attack Westerplatte and annihilate a lot of, well, they not annihilate single-handedly, but it would be the main ship in the German Navy in this area, the eastern side of the Navy. Well, the majority would be in the west, and the North Sea and on the ports, and also out in the Atlantic, just everywhere. So the Schleswig-Holstein, as well as a bunch of other small minor ships, would also be a part of the German Navy that would attack the Poles at 4:45 a.m. this time. So, alright. The German invasion of Poland began on September 1st, 1939 at 4:45 a.m., right? And most people hear that Westerplatte was the first place where all of this happened. And that is somewhat true. They happened basically at the same time, but Westerplatte just happened a few minutes earlier. 4:41, 4:42, 4:44, whatever. They happened a few minutes before 4:45 technically, even though the war would be declared at 4:45. And that's when the Schleswig-Holstein would start bombarding the Polish troops in Westerplatte. Also, Luftwaffe Stuka bombardments, again Luftwaffe would happen in this area. They know that the Polish in this area has a lot of good anti-aircraft, so they make sure to have their bombers guided by fighters, so that they wouldn't be completely demolished. They would bombard places like Chu, towns south of Danzig, and also some of the Polish positions in this area, in addition to, of course, Pomorze front in general. So, once the Schleswig-Holstein bombarded Westerplatte, the garrison was highly alerted. They were already on highest alert, but Sucharski's Westerplatte garrison would try to actually like defend themselves, and they defended themselves pretty well. So not only were they bombarded by the navy, but there was also landing attempts that happened like on the beaches of Westerplatte that really didn't work. And like on the first day Westerplatte just lived. There was nothing to stop it. So in Danzig itself, which Westerplatte is a small peninsula in that free state, Danzig was led by its leader Albert Forster, and he is a member of the Nazi Party. They're the ones who were in charge of the Danzig Free State. And the Danzig Free State opted to actually join Germany pretty early on. So the only real defense, Polish defense that happened in the Free City of Danzig was in the post office, the Danzig post office, in which there was a huge fight over. Although after like the first parts of the day, the Germans would be able to overcome it. Although that they took a huge price, because they tried. They couldn't open the doors to it. It was barricaded very well by the very tiny defense in the surrounded building, and they finally had to use like cannons and stuff to artillery guns to just like blow open the doors. And of course, after they blew open the doors, the Germans were able to march in. This is SS Heimwehr, SS Regiment Heimwehr, I believe, is the one that's attacking the Polish post office in Danzig. And actually, Albert Forster was there too to see this happen. But Albert Forster was also in a different place on September 1st. He was at Assess signing an important sheet of paper. So it's a document that outlined the Danzig annexation into Germany, and they would have a few articles. Basically, I'm not going to talk about all of the details about what each of the articles mean. In summary, it has a few things. One, Danzig should be a part of Germany. Two, they be in complete jurisdiction under German law that's already been in there. And three, that the Danzig constitution was no longer in effect. So after he signed that, Hitler would match Forster's treaty and sign his own paper that would declare that he accepted the Danzig annexation into the German Reich. So immediately, just like a few hours into the war, the true cause of the conflict, or at least what the Germans sometimes claimed was the cause of conflict, the Italians definitely, Count Ciano kind of pretended like he believed it was about Danzig, calling it the Danzig crisis. It's over already. First few hours, and Danzig already is a part of Germany. There's annex, and the only small resistance was in the post office. If there's any other parts that I'm thinking of, the garrison at Gdynia was also overrun in the day, and a tiny attempt to advance in the Hell Peninsula was attempted, but it made no real progress. The Germans were unable to really get there to the Hell Peninsula, but they took everything around it, so completely surrounded all of these guys. would be in this Danzig area of the front.